Cursed be the ground for our sake. Both thorns and thistles it shall bring forth for us. For out of the ground we were taken for the dust that we are, and to the dust we shall return. The From the Dust podcast features people who have had life-changing experiences. Here they share their stories and testimonials about how God can move and change a person's life. Welcome to the From the Dust podcast. Take a listen. Open your hearts and ears. Here's your host, James Science.
Hello, and welcome to From the Dust podcast. I'm your host, James Science. Whatever you are and whatever you do, hope you are highly favored and highly blessed. If you have a story or testimony you would like to share, go ahead and hit me up From the Dust podcast at outlook.com. That's From the Dust podcast at outlook.com. Stories need to be told and voices need to be heard. Well, today, like every day, you know my show, we know how we do. We talk about life stories, you know, the changes, the hardships, and what we do to overcome our hardships in life and struggles in life. And here today, my guest, Lisa, is here to share her story and what she does. Let's go ahead and bring Lisa. Lisa, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
Like I talked about earlier, I can be a little bit better just here in quarantine, reading test results. I lost my taste, my sense of taste and smell, but it's a little bit weird not being able to enjoy what you can enjoy in life. Sometimes you take it for granted, and it's something new for me.
Yeah, I know. Why bother eating?
Yeah, well, you know what? I normally don't really eat some things, but I ate some Alfredo pasta, and I never eat that. I can't taste it, but I guess it's something new.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So let's sorry about that. Let's just get right into it. My podcast, we talk about, you know, life struggles, you know, what brought you out of them, some of the hardest days of your life, and what you do now. So let's just go ahead and get right into it. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Pittsburgh in a very Italian family.
Nice.
Yeah, very Italian. And to be quite honest with you, a long line of alcoholism and a long line of what would now be considered abuse. And a call from CYF would have come in and people would have shown up at my house. But back then, what happened in the house stayed in the house. And I don't even know if there was CYF that far back. So then, you know, I went through my teens and early 20s and a lot of drugs, a lot of alcohol, things like that. Pretty common story in a way, but you know, when you're in your own skin, it feels different. Became a Christian in my early 20s, got married, and then so that's all that stuff subsided as God filled my heart because the trauma steals and God gives you back what was stolen. So that was cool. And I worked at a Christian school for a long time, and that was cool. And then I left. And when I left, all these other things happened. So I left the school I worked at for 17 years. I went to work in an inpatient dual diagnosed drug and alcohol treatment facility where the management was a little bit more unstable than the clients. We moved. Both of my kids moved out, and all those changes together put me into shutdown mode. And I sort of was numb. And I didn't know what was going on because I was the person that helped everybody. And then all of a sudden, I was in trouble. And so this went on. As that started, God gave me two scriptures. And one was the latter half of your life will be more greatly blessed than the former. And the other scripture was, what the heck was it? Oh, deep roots bear fruit. It was a passage out of Isaiah. And it said, once more, the remnant of Israel will bear roots below and fruit above. And I held on to that for 7 years. 7 years. Anxiety made me a really good employee, but inwardly I was not very good. So anxiety is when you care too much Depression is when you stop caring, right? And so that's where I was at when I went into my 40s. Left the rehab, went to work for a healthcare system, started to do my own work. As God brought me out of the anxiety, I went on this journey where I had to figure out some things about myself, where my roots were, what was causing my anxiety, and how to connect with God in a different way, because trauma needs different tools. So when you go through 5 major life changes in a year and a half, that's pretty traumatic. But it was the thing that God used to equip me for my call. And I didn't know it was going to turn into this. I was for 7 years, I just hung on by a thread. None of my regular Christian practices blessed me. So reading and worship and all of that, that's how shut down I was. I couldn't retain the word, let alone let it bless me. My mind was always drifting off and shooting off into different directions. And worship was like one of my mainstays. And now all of a sudden I'm in worship and I'm just like numb, not feeling anything. So I could go through the motions, but I felt like a phony because I'm going through the motions. And I bet you lots of other people can relate to that.
Oh,
We just don't.
I had a good, I still do. I believe I had a good run with the depression and anxiety. I get anxious and depressed, and for a long time, even though I serve God now, but in the beginning, in the midst of, I guess my deepest depression, I was saying, well, nothing could help. I'm a big worshiper. I love worship music. I've been part of bands, and I grew up, learning that from my dad, and that was my strongest point. When I was down and out, and I knew nothing else, I knew nothing else but to worship. And then my deepest and darkest, I could relate. I couldn't. It didn't help the way I wanted to, or that it did in the beginning.
Right. And so who do you talk to about that stuff? Because the typical answers are read more, pray more, worship more. And that doesn't work for trauma and it doesn't work for depression. You need some additional tools. And what is out there is your typical counseling model. And so coaching is something that I do, but I coach the heart, not for goals. And so I help you identify triggers, and what is triggering you is very often connected to something in the past and also connected to what you perceive as what is being stolen from you or threatening your emotional needs. So we unpack all that stuff, and I clearly call myself a faith and life coach, but I have a gift of counsel. So I'm not a professional counselor, but I can take you from the top levels of anxiety and in a few hours get you down to a place where God and you have connected at a really meaningful way. And so even when I do that, and I never in a million years dreamed my life was going to turn out like this. But even as I do that, so we go beyond like reframing. So when you're anxious, they tell you to reframe, and that didn't help me very much either. I don't know about you, but I still go back to that same loop. But when I started to learn how to ask Jesus questions, I went through a coaching program called Metaformation, run by a guy named Tony Stolstis. And he's like, just talk to Jesus, have a conversation. So I just started asking questions because that's what I was learning. And in doing that, my questions were, how are you going to protect my heart so that I'm not anxious when I walk into work? How are you going to walk with me today? And what do you want to say to my heart so I can rest securely in your love? Things like that. And then I would just listen. But I would listen with the eyes of my heart, with the ears of my heart, and to sense his presence. Because Well, even with sensing his presence, I was like, what is that message that his presence is delivering? And so it became more and more clear that his presence isn't just comfort, it speaks its own language. And sometimes people like call it comfort because we don't know what else to call it. But if you sit with it a little while, you'll be like, oh, this feels like love. This feels like healing. This just feels like relief. Like I can let go of the stress that I've been holding. And it's absolutely beautiful. And so when I coach people, they walk away with tools to be able to take themselves through those hard times, through those times of anxiety. And I always tell them it's not like breakthrough. It's not concrete. Emotions come and go, situations come and go. It's the way you decide to connect with the Father in the midst of that time.
Well, there's you brought a good point. My strongest and my closest connections were not through. Well, I believe in prayer. Right? I pray with or through a conversation. Um, there's a difference between when you're praying to God and then when you're Jesus or the Lord Jesus. When you have a conversation, what can I do today to be different? Or what are you gonna do today to be different in my life? You know, what are you gonna do for me? What can I do for you? When you get in those deep conversations with the Lord, those are my biggest breakthroughs. That's when he helps me the most, and he brings me out of my ruts, out of my anxiety, out of my
Yeah,
depression. And I want people to know the difference between that. You know, there's a difference between prayer and a conversation, just like you mentioned.
there is. So when I pray publicly, I pray so that I'm tuned into God and I'm praying to God, but I'm praying in a way that the people that are around me can relate to it and enter into that prayer too. But when it's me and God, I don't have to worry about anybody else relating to me. He already knows me.
Exactly. Wow. If we can backtrack, if it's okay, talk about 7 years of anxiety and depression. What were some of the effects that brought you into a state of depression?
Oh, so I don't talk about this part very much, but sometimes you get these OCD like tendencies when you have anxiety and depression. And I found myself like I would be walking to my bus stop to get on the bus to go to work. And I would walk the exact same path. I would park in the exact same lot. Anxiety and depression tend to box you in. And so that's a pretty personal thing I'm sharing. And now I'm doing it with you. But that was one of the effects for me. Another one was I was kick butt at work because anxiety made me double check. And I worked for a very well known surgeon. And it made me really good at work. So Monday through Friday, I was on point because I had to be. Saturday, I would run errands, clean the house. Sunday morning, I'd wake up and cry. I'd sit there, have a cup of coffee, and I'd cry. And my husband would come out of the room and he'd be like, why are you crying? And I'd say, I don't know. And I didn't. It took me a long time to figure that out. But from it, like I started blogging. I had a blog post for a little while called Falling Down the Rabbit Hole When Nothing Is As It Used to Be. And it was really cathartic.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well,
Yeah.
it's I like the people that bring on. We have different backgrounds, different stories. Yeah, this is real helpful because I know there's people out there that deal with the anxiety and depression that don't talk about it, and it's okay to seek, it's okay to seek help outside your faith realm, because I believe God puts people and he gives them the gifts, he gives them the knowledge to be to help, us as believers, not just as believers or even non-believers. God puts he gives the gifts of doctors, he gives the gifts of physicians,
Mm-hmm.
counselors, uh, what are the best ways for somebody that's going through a deep depression and anxiety to seek the help as a believer? Is it okay to seek professional help?
Well, I did. So I started, I worked for a doctor's office for a brief stint, but the doctor triggered me too much. He yelled at me like my father used to. And I was like, I'm a grown woman. I'm out of here. But before I left, I had a doctor's appointment with somebody else in the practice. And she was like, do you want something for your anxiety? And while I didn't want to admit it, I said, I think I need it. And it absolutely was the best thing for me. And I know it's not that way for everybody, but it was for me. So I say start with your doctor, your healthcare provider, have a conversation with them. And then there was I went to a counselor. She was not a believer, but she respected faith, and she was able to use that openly and easily in our conversations. I only had to see her 3 times. That's how much God used her. She was not a believer, but she was absolutely used by God. She asked me a couple of quick key questions that like made me wake up, so to speak. And then that's where my healing really began, is when I was able to connect a few dots because of her. So I saw her like 3 or 4 times. And then I was able to um, allow other people to come around me and support me. And I was able to process with some people who were non-judgmental and knew how to hold space for me. And
Awesome.
that's super important because anxiety and depression make you feel alone.
It does, and a lot of people don't understand that if they're not going through it and they haven't experienced. You don't got to experience life like traumatic situations to get depression or anxiety like yourself. You can go to something like traumatic, like some people have. It was this the simple day to day routine,
Mhm.
work that brought you to it. Yeah, for the ones that don't understand that, it can be life crippling. It could literally break you and as a person and make you seem like you're alone and make you seem like you're the weakest person.
Well, and here's the other thing is you end up, if you have a stigma about it within the faith realm, in the church that you go to, if there's a stigma about it, then it starts to separate you from your people. Because I don't have anybody to talk to about this, because if I talk to them about it, I might get judged. And they'll tell me my faith is weak, that I need to pray more. Well, I have been praying and it's not getting me anywhere. So, like, my heart is to see the people to be able to have these kinds of conversations, both with God and with each other. If I had to sum it up, I'd have to say, I want to see emotional health and healing and wholeness become a regular part of the Christian experience. I do. I don't think we should have to choose between a therapist and our faith. I think that there are times for a therapist, but I think there's also that a place where the body of Christ can enter into relationship in a different way and be used of God in ways that can really bring some hope to other people. So I want it to be mainstream. It'd be pretty nice if it was so mainstream that I was out of a job.
Yeah, really, that's something we need more as believers. We need something like that to help anybody do what they're going through, their situations, and just in general life struggles. So with everything that you had experience with the anxiety and depression, you sought to help favor. Now you're doing that in return. Am I correct?
Yeah, so God had me on such it probably I'll say a 3-year healing journey. And I'll always be healing because things come up and you have to deal with them. But after that, I had changed so much that I was not a good administrative assistant because I wasn't anxious and double checking everything. And it got to the point that my husband and I had a conversation. And it was a simple one. And he was like, I think we better figure out a time for you to quit working. And I needed to hear that because I was jamming myself into this small identity when God was like doing all this amazing stuff in me and through me. He's like, I think it's time. I was like, thank goodness. I really wanted to quit, and I wouldn't quit unless I had his blessing. So last year at 60, I left the workforce. And when I left the workforce, it was like God kissed it. I wrote a book. I developed a therapeutic deck of cards. I just released a companion journal to go with it. And I still am coaching people, but like the call and the message are to get that the message is for emotional health and wholeness to become a part of everyone's life. Well, everybody can't see me, but they can do this in private. And coaches can use this, counselors can use the cards because they're a combination of cognitive behavior therapy and faith-filled principles. So I don't know. I feel like when God kissed me leaving the workforce, he also made provision for that message to go out because now I had the time and space to dedicate to it.
Yeah, that's where I believe he did with this even before this situation. Now where I'm in quarantine, but I always wanted to do more, to help people or to just spread a message. And yeah, with this COVID situation, I was like, man, what do I do now? Like just people that need to hear things, just people that are at home, not doing much because of closures and stuff. And then he brought forth the idea and the dream in my heart to start a podcast and to start sharing. I was like, and this is pretty cool. And out of a bad situation, this podcast was birthed into light.
I love it because everybody's pivoting. Everybody has to find another way to live out their call, express their passions, whatever you want to say. And this case, the COVID actually was a blessing because it gave me the opportunity to work on a few things.
Yeah, there's a few parties that I know, some people that started out of it, and hopefully it subsides. It's a real thing. People want people to understand it's a real thing, something to joke about, but through pandemic or pandemic, whatever people call it, let's use the time wisely, and our gifts that God's given us to help or to better people's lives.
It's true.
Oh,
It's true. So COVID can't limit the spread of the gospel.
yes. Let's talk about these cards. I remember seeing them on your Facebook. I just I was looking through it. You want
Mm-hmm.
to share and talk about these cards that you came up with?
That's a God story. I was happy with putting out a little book, right? And right after it was published, I was on the phone talking to a friend. I said, I think I'm going to develop a therapeutic deck of cards and call them cut cards. And she said, what are they? And I was like, I don't know. I wasn't planning on saying that. But within 3 weeks, I had the blueprints for it, the shell of it. The idea was sort of cemented almost. And so then after I made the cards, I put a little study together, and I identified probably 12 people to use in the study. One was a woman, and all of it was to gauge the effectiveness and to see if I needed to tweak anything. So one was a woman that had a husband who was an alcoholic and 2 kids in active addiction. And her life was super hard. One was a woman with cancer. One was a young girl with a bipolar diagnosis and PTSD. Another girl had lost her mom unexpectedly. I really targeted people who were going through it. And overall, I was like elated with the results because each one of them within 2 months of using the cards, which were a process of identifying the emotion you were feeling, recognizing the story behind the emotion, right? The thoughts that drive the feelings, identifying unhealthy coping strategies, whether that's self-medicating, self-protecting, self-sabotage, or negative evaluations. Like women are really good at that. We beat ourselves up more than men do. And then identifying what your heart needs. So your emotional heart are your emotional needs: love, belonging, care, understanding, worth, value, safety, and security. And by the way, safety and security was my big one. If I got triggered, I also felt very threatened and unsafe. And that is my history back in childhood.
Mm.
Right? So people don't often make those kinds of connections. So you look at what your heart needs, and then I have a bunch of questions that you can ask the Father for yourself. And you choose the question that resonates with you. And sometimes that is something as simple as, Jesus, how do you see me? And then you listen and you look to see how he wants to interact with you using the eyes of your heart. And people can go through that process, and it's like so targeted and so spot on that I've had some people tell me who had stalled in counseling, wow, you took me further than my counselor did. And I was like, really? That's all God. Uh, so, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty cool. God, how you know, I probably wouldn't thought about asking that myself. So yeah, that's a blessing. You're able to help people in that way. That's pretty cool. I admire that.
Thanks. Thanks.
What are some of your best experiences coming through it and being able to share and help people with what you're doing now?
Best experiences. I don't know. Here's my best experience. I live in a state of awe and wonder most of the time because I see things differently. I see things differently than my whole Christian experience, not just that 7 years. Now I see God in different ways. He shows up in different situations. I appreciate certain things more. And my my life way of experiencing and encountering him is different. So that's a best experience, ongoing experience, I should say. And it's actually more in line with the scriptures. So we in the church use the educational model, teach and preach. And there, in a lot of churches, it's not about the experience. And you're not supposed to trust your feelings and all of that, but there's no place for you to work out your salvation and acknowledge a tough emotion. So yeah, that's my brave space. I bravely go into that and say, here I am. Can I give you the pain that goes with this fear? Because it's really hurting me. And well, can I give it to you? And honest to God, I watch him take it. And when I'm with my clients and I take them into one of those kinds of visual prayers, they have these beautiful encounters. And they watch God take something that was painful to them in a vision, but they also experience a relief of not being afraid anymore. So I don't know. I just live in a state of awe and wonder. God shows up and I'm like, I can't believe you did that every time. It's just a cool way to live.
I always give my guests the opportunity to share what's on the heart. For the ones listening, that will be listening, the ones that are going to be watching, for those that are going through at the moment some type of depression, some type of anxiety, or just hardship. What kind of hope and inspiration can you give them to step out, to make a change, to seek advice, or just to better their life and make a change in their life?
Yeah, so if you don't change, you don't change. If nothing changes, nothing in your life is going to change. You'll be stuck. You'll be stuck with the pain that goes along with depression and anxiety. You'll be stuck in your relationship with God. So let the pain drive you to do something different and something good and something godlike. You know, go find some help. or you know, they could always get in touch with me. I coach virtually, and honestly, I say it all the time. I'm not a counselor. I just am a facilitator bringing you into God's presence, and He does the work. And you walk away really feeling so much better and knowing how to manage your own emotions in partnership with God, not by suppressing or denying.
Where can the listeners and viewers find you on your social media? Where can they seek your help if they're looking for?
So I have a Facebook page called Pittsburgh Transformation Center. That's my business page. I post some things on there. My last name is Penny, so it's Lisa Penny. They could find me personally on Facebook. My website is ptcenter.life. Because the name of my business is Pittsburgh Transformation Center. So ptcenter.life. I do discovery calls where you can figure out if that's a good fit for you. And I also I'll give you a referral if I'm not the right fit, because I really want you to do better, feel better, and live better.
That's what's up. Well, Lisa,
Yeah.
I want to thank you for your time and for your words and your encouragement to come on here. You know, it takes a strong person to come out and share their life stories and what they've been through. This is From the Dust Podcast. If you have a story or testimony you would like to share, go ahead and leave it From the Dust Podcast at Outlook.com. That's From the Dust Podcast at Outlook.com. Stories need to be told. Voices need to be heard.
Therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. All things are passed away. Behold, all things become new.
And if you have a story or testimony you would like to share, go ahead and hit me up From the Dust Podcast at Outlook.com. Stories need to be told. Voices need to be heard. I want to thank you again, Lisa, for your time. I appreciate it. It was a blessing having you on.
Thank you for having me.